Developers have a need for speed to meet market demands, and application security needs to ensure that data and privacy constraints are met. Unfortunately, that can slow down delivery. So, is it even possible to deliver secure software quickly? Enter Secure Coding, brought to you by GuidePoint Security's Application Security Services. Secure coding is more than a process, it's a cultural shift, one that will make it possible for both developers and AppSec to build in security while applications are being developed. Visit our AppSec Resource Hub to learn more at securityweekly.com/guidepoint.
Your organization is building and updating business-critical web applications faster than ever. And with so much pressure to move fast, you may find yourself making trade-offs between innovation and security. Now you can build fast without sacrificing security with Invicti, the zero-noise application security platform that helps your dev, sec, and ops teams work together to secure every website, web app, and API. With unparalleled accuracy, coverage, and automation, Invicti scales like no other AppSec solution. Invicti, AppSec with zero noise. Visit securityweekly.com/Invicti.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Brian Glass about election security, security education, and data visualization, and now it's at OWASP. Now it's time for the news. First, we're without Mike this week. I think he got too used to having some time off, but I'm lucky to be joined by Akira Brand. Welcome, Akira.
Hello, John.
Good to see you. It's been a while. Man, we have so much stuff. You leave us. So we've been running AWS ASW vaults for folks who aren't aware. We're pulling some stuff out of the vault, some of our older episodes when we're off for vacations and stuff. There's some really great material out there. You should definitely be going back and checking it out. But let's see. That means we've got a ton of news to cover, as I said. We're not going to get through all of it, so please check out our show notes. And let's see, Akira. Where do we want to start in this list? How about CISA announced the story about a CVSS 9.8 in not a pacemaker itself, but in pacemaker-related software. So this was an interesting one, just because it's such a. I mean, I tend to pay attention to CVSS numbers. I know a lot of people causes eye rolls, but something of this criticality and something, even anything related to healthcare, seems like it's a bad way to start the day.
Well, if it's a bad way to start the day, let's do it.
Love it. So yeah, this is. I don't know if you got a chance to look at this closely. It's what was going on here, at least from the way I saw it, is it is in not directly controlling the pacemaker, but the data coming off of it. Someone would be able to get in there and manipulate that data.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, this actually brings up an interesting point on a lot of medical devices right now, which is like the data being collected from the medical device and where it's then being sent, even if it's not data that gets breached or gets hacked. Some people are not enjoying how their medical devices are using their data right now. When I read this article, this actually reminded me of another instance that I'd heard of CPAP machines actually sending data on their usage to the insurance company. And if you don't use the CPAP enough, the insurance company could actually refuse to pay for it. Now, that can feel a little bit problematic, but then that bears the question of, well, what if someone messes with this data and erases all of the usage data, and then insurance just refuses to pay for all these people's CPAPs? So it's tough. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's and I'm living the news. Actually, I just got a CPAP machine, as I try to always improve myself.
Congratulations.
We'll see. But yeah, so it's we were talking about this off air. The way this is set up, at least for me. So within the first 90 days, I have to wear it 30 nights for at least 4 hours a night. And if I don't hit that, then the insurance doesn't have to pay for a machine and I'm left with a bill. So not great. I mean, at the same time, I see their side. They don't want to pay for something that's not being used. I think my questions come around is, after that 90 days, do they still keep getting that data? Because everything I've done around this device so far is very sort of, let's say, not clear about what's going on and, all the details around it. So we'll see where it goes. And to clarify on that little point, the machine actually has built into it an LTE modem. So it's not, some people want these they're looking to get them on Wi-Fi, but all the ones I've seen out there so far, it's built in. So you can't, I mean, I can either build or get a bigger Faraday box and like shove it inside, but I'm excited to see the data myself and analyze it. There's some open source tools out there, but I don't necessarily want that floating off to some other company for the remainder of the time I use it.
So, this actually brings me to another point on a different article if you're ready to actually
Please.
leave this one behind. Okay, cool. So, I put in an article. If you look at the show notes, it's number 1. It's called Worm GPT New AI Tool Allows Cyber Criminals to Launch Sophisticated Cyber Attacks. This is another example of someone training their own LLM and deploying it and using it for nefarious purposes. Now, we were thinking about this. Me and a friend of mine were talking through this earlier today and saying to ourselves, it's not so much the nefarious purpose. It is a nefarious purpose, sure. But what can even be seen as a little more nefarious is where are they getting this data that they're training these LLMs on? So we're talking about like the security implications of where I work. For example, if we get breached and our customers' data isn't only exposed, but it's then used to train someone else's LLM, that could be actually quite dangerous. So we're thinking like, what if your CPAP machine gets breached? What if your heart monitor gets breached? And then now your data is being used to train LLMs for nefarious purposes. And I thought that was kind of trippy, right? I thought that was a little bit of an interesting way to think about things. I was curious, John, like what do you think about that?
Yeah, I can think of one use case now that you mention it. I mean, if you can find my breathing patterns, I mean, I know it's at sleep, but still, if you could find those, could you use that to actually help generate a fake me? I know we talk about this stuff in our security weekly chats. We're on here for at least half an hour every week. If someone wants to build an LLM based off me, it's not that difficult, unfortunately. But any of this type of data, it's it's both the data can be used for good and bad, and also, as we're seeing, the LLMs and the GPTs can be used for good and bad. So there's been a few of these over the last few weeks. We're covering them here and there when they seem useful to talk about, not to use. But yeah, it's they mentioned here also Poison GPT, and there's a few others out there. And it's a busy field. It's obviously caught up a lot of our attention. And we'll keep following it and sort of trying to keep you guys up to date with what's going on.
Sweet.
Let's see what else. I'm going to bounce over to. There's an article in Wired, and I understand this might be a paywall for some of you. I hope you're able to get to the story, but they had this pretty interesting article talking about EV chargers, and when it's one thing to charge your car in your garage or at home, wherever that is. But when you're going out to a public environment and suddenly taking cable off of like something and plugging it into your car, this should be giving people shivers, right? We don't do this with our PCs or a lot of other things. We have our laptops, so it is okay to do with your car. And that's really sort of what this article is talking about. They chat with a few researchers, and this could be something from probably not a nation state, but it could be a nation state, right? To go after this, modify these machines. I do have an EV. I've been wanting to use the public chargers. They're never where I want them to be, and that's a whole separate conversation, right? But I haven't got a chance to look at them closely and go, okay, how much work would it take for me to actually, I like hardware hacking. Hey, that's a big piece of hardware. But is that something that's feasible for a singular person like me to do some modifications and have some fun with? Or does this require something at a more nation state level? I'm not sure on that yet. I know there's some good security folks I know of good security folks at Tesla. I'm sure most of these companies have folks that are thinking about this stuff, but still it's an area where, I don't know, we had data condoms. Now I guess you'll have to have some sort of EV charging condom.
All over the place.
Yeah.
You know what? I actually am curious, the conversation we just had about maturity models, and I wonder what a mature EV charging station as far as security looks like.
Well, I mean, that's a great question. The maturity of the design has been advancing I'd say 6 months for the last 2 or 3 years. The latest thing some of my EV nerd friends figured out over last week or so is the plug standard which Tesla uses seems to be becoming a standard nationwide, if not worldwide. So there's, for folks who don't know, you think it's something as simple as plugging a cable into a car. There's either 3 or 4 different standards on what that plug looks like. And of course, they're not compatible with each other. And until the last few weeks, the big guys, Tesla, with their supercharger network, they didn't want to share that with other companies. I think they've now started licensing that out to other people, but still, just the fact that I'm they will allow me to use their chargers. I still have to have some sort of connector or thing. So the point being, there's a ton of maturity happening on the physical side as well as the electrical side. So at least to me, it only makes sense that, we're going to keep seeing some sort of advancement on the security side. What do you do to authenticate when you walk up to these things? Do you need to authenticate more? Is the billing aspect of that done correctly? Can someone do like we see people doing with ATMs and sort of do some sort of skimming off that? So there's a lot of areas there to be explored.
The one thing I'll say just to end that conversation is that if you go to the very bottom of the article, there's actually a section that the UK rolled out a bunch of requirements for EV chargers. And it just has a couple of examples there. So it is happening, John, like for sure. Yeah. Like you just said, it's just, as they say in the article, it's just kind of going really slowly.
Yeah. And it's sort of like the charge of some of these stations. And for those who are interested, another one sort of related to this, we're veering a tiny bit off course, but it's interesting, hopefully. The EU is just coming out with I think it's proposed, it's not an actual standard yet, but they want to have across the major roads in Europe chargers every, I think it's like 50 kilometers or maybe 100 kilometers, but they're like actually from a government level actually trying to build, because that's what we need, right, to make this useful. Otherwise it's everyone has range anxiety, and that's a whole separate conversation, but we've gone down that path far enough, so I'm going to keep going. Cool. Kira, I had a fun one here which I really liked, and it's so it's a story about a guy reverse engineering a light bulb. After his friend asked him, why does my light bulb need to know where my location is? And right, they had like some sort of smart light bulb which they got, and there's an app, of course, because there's always an app. And the app, one of the things it wanted to do was have permission to access their locations. Like, I turn you on and off and maybe change colors. Why do you need location? And he took this as a weekend project and sort of dove into it. But what I liked about this one was he described it, this overall story in a Twitter thread. Right, it's folks hear us all the time talk about, and we like long, beefy blog posts, but like there was something about this one, the way it caught me, that it was nice sort of bite-sized pieces as you worked through what was going on here.
So I read through this and I was confused for most of it, which is fine. Oh, no. Just learning. No, it's okay. It's okay. But yeah, I actually was curious, like at the end of the day, it looked like it was like an optional thing. And is that right?
I think so.
Okay.
It's, I mean, you can always say no, right, when it asks you for permissions. And I mean, there's a chance at that point that the app would turn around and say, well, you're not going to give me access, so I'm not going to let you control your light bulbs. I would hope that does not happen. But yeah, I could see valid uses for this, right? You could have and I can't remember what the end of this article was. I actually ended up looking more at the reverse engineering and some of the libraries they were using than actual the why behind this whole thing. But off the top of my head, I can see doing like a geofencing use case. So like as I leave my house, it turns the lights off, or as I come back to my house, it turns the lights on. And there's lots of different ways to do it with either home automation systems or with Apple's HomeKit or with your light bulb app. So there might be a legit use for it. But I just thought it was really cool how, and part of the reason I bring something like this in is, you didn't understand, okay, well, go grab a light bulb and just start breaking the thing apart and playing with it. Like, 100%. I think you gave enough details here. And that's what I like, right? It's not like you don't have to go and get that EV charger and figure out, okay, are there security bits on there, or do I just bring my Torx? Right? You can just go grab a light bulb and some app, and it probably helps to go do this at maybe like Alibaba, not from like a Philips light bulb, because they're going to be a little bit looser, probably security-wise. But this is something you can get your hands on and play with, and I think that's really cool. That's, in general, why the hardware hacking stuff sort of catches my attention.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. And I think, honestly, that's one thing I wish I had a little bit more freedom on in life in general, is just time to do this. But it would definitely be worth looking at, like in more depth, because this stuff is fucking fascinating. Pardon my French.
We'll let you go.
We can edit that part out.
We might beep it in post. Yeah, no, it is, right. It's and I think it comes back for me, like when I was first learning how to program on a I'm going to date myself, a Apple II in like TurboGrafx, right? Like moving something around the screen. I've said 10 million times in a show, I'm very visual. So if I can see something move or change, that drives me, right? And we were talking about games with Brian, programming games. It's the same thing here with security. Like, one of the things we've probably talked about in the past is if I want to show a CEO of a company, if I say I'm doing a pen test or something, and I want to, or code review, and I want to show the head guy at a company, either a CEO or whoever's writing the check for me, why this is bad, I'll walk up into his office with a laptop and it set up so he just like Metasploit or whatever else and say, just press return here. And like, he sees as things get compromised. That sort of bringing things back to reality, I think, really helps people understand. So that's why these things catch my attention.
We talk about that actually from time to time, not so much for like translating problems to CEOs, but translating problems to developers. Like one thing that we're doing at my job right now is actually training our engineers on Sneak and how to use it by themselves. And we're using it like with their code, and we're showing them like, hey, like check it out. Like in the code that we're actually writing, like here's all these vulnerabilities, and here's how you can just go through and quickly fix it with like Sneak automated PRs. That's much better than just telling them, hey, like there's this thing called cross-site scripting. There's this thing called path traversal vulnerabilities. If you can actually show them in their own code, similar to like how you would show a CEO or an executive or whatever, the problem in their own product, I think that actually makes a lot more of a difference.
It does. And I was going to go somewhere with that, but I lost my own train of thought, so it's my fault. I'm going to keep going, though. So we've got a few networking things to talk about here. I'm going to bundle them all up together. I think I've got them all together. We'll see. Starting off with Cisco, their ACI, which is Advanced Compute Infrastructure. Yeah, so I believe it used to be Cloud Stack based. Not sure if it still is. But there was a vulnerability found here where there was a weakness in encryption from cloud to cloud, resulting in people could actually be able to get to the plain text of this. So this is actually on their Cisco Nexus 9000s. So I'm probably using the wrong version of ACI. My apologies. But nonetheless, when you think you're encrypting network traffic and it turns out you're not, or you are, but in a breakable manner, most of us would consider that bad.
Yes. Talk to me, John, about like when you say like when you think you're encrypting, like what would be things that you'd be looking for that you're like, oh yeah, this is totally fine, that maybe would be a pitfall?
So what they're doing here, it looks like the ciphers which are being selected, I don't think it's default. I don't see that on there. But so basically, with these network devices, if you're going to set up encryption between them, there's usually a what's the phrase I'm looking for? Symmetric encryption, right? So you do this with BGP, you do this with some of the other protocols. You can do it with IPsec. But if you're doing that type of large network equipment to large network equipment, if it's going cross cloud or cross network, and you don't trust that connection in between for whatever reason, you're going to put some sort of encryption across it. The problem comes when you pick a cipher and either that cipher is not as strong as you think it is, or there's a weakness in that cipher. And what that allows is someone who is actually sniffing out that connection to be able to grab that data and then decrypt it through one manner or another, whether it's just reversing something simple like Route 13, or it could be something more complex like, okay, let's grab 50 gigabytes worth of data and we're going to put it into a box and just rainbow table until we actually figure out what's going on and what the encryption is behind it. So there's a range of things. It sounded like the way this is done and getting a high classification, high criticality, that, they say an unallowed remote attacker is able to read or modify intersite encrypted traffic.
Wow. Yeah, I see that. Read and modify traffic. That is, yep, okay.
And these boxes, I mean, starting price for Cisco Nexus 9000, I think our starting price is a small car. So these are systems which people are depending upon. So I'm going to keep going. And I've got two more, unfortunately, for a vendor we've talked about a few times this year, Fortinet. And I think the way these two are coming out is they came out, I think, the same No, a few weeks apart. I was hoping to say that they were just part of their quarterly release. So one was July 11th, and the other was June 23rd. So I'll hit these both really quickly. Akira, feel free to comment on them. But I think there's also an interesting discussion around any vendor that we see repeated security issues coming out of that's selling security tools. So that's why, right? I'm not saying it's bad. It's because there's another vendor out there I obviously love to make fun of. Not these guys, but so first one. Let's see if I get these in order. The first one came out on the 23rd. So this is in their FortiNAC project, which is network access control. There is a deserialization vulnerability in, apparently this is a Java-based application, which would result in remote code execution. So not too much details, but we'll leave it at that. If you're doing deserialization, there's some sort of input. These are both sort of input-based issues. So some sort of input coming in. However, it's being deserialized into a structure in Java. It's not being done correctly. And the result is someone's able to execute code within that application. And this is leading to a bad day. If you're doing that around, for those that don't know, or care to talk about really briefly, network access control. I think of it as 802.1, not Q. Oh, I'm going to forget my IEEE. But there's a spec that, long story short, you either in Wi-Fi or on Ethernet, you plug into a jack. If that switch is configured in this manner, it goes and talks to, in this case, the Fortinet server or some other server and says, hey, this person just hopped on this port 23. And then some amount of communication happens to figure out, okay, should this guy have access to the network or not? And based on the result of that, it could be, hey, maybe their antivirus isn't up to date, or that employee is no longer with the company, or that employee is on vacation. So then you could say, hey, put them onto VLAN 5, which is like, some sort of a VLAN where we'll go and check and see what's going on with that box, or they actually go and get to do their job. So that's the software, and having remote code execution on that sort of allows you to bypass the overall process of things. So not good. The second one on FortiOS and FortiProxy. So this is their, I'm going to use a hand wave and call it a WAF, but is a smart proxy with deep inspection. And these things are sort of difficult to do right. So what's going on here with, again, proxy or WAF, Akira, is in this particular case, it was a vulnerability specifically in how it was processing HTTP2. Which we've had a few other vendors have issues with this over the years. New protocol comes out, has a few sort of, edge cases which could be used to someone's advantage. And in this case, we have as a result of that a stack-based buffer overflow, which again is probably going to, if not eventually result in an RCE, it'll be some sort of a DOS or some sort of general bad thing on a security device, which is not great. But so with those two, Akira, and you're in your day job of actually doing training of developers and how to do some of these things you just talked about, like with SNCC. It seems like there's a bit of a tell for this particular vendor where they've been covered at least once already this year for some other issues, if not twice. How would you go about training one of your developer teams to sort of try to make that be a little less happening in the future?
That's a good question.
Interview question.
Oh man, I love this. First off, I would essentially break down what exactly is happening, like how you just did to me. I would break it down point by point so that it actually is not confusing. I know that may sound like a little bit pedantic, well, yeah, duh, of course you would explain it.
No.
But I find that sometimes when we work with engineers, this is not the language they use every single day. And if they don't understand what we're talking about, then how can we possibly get them to fix it, right? And then I think what I would also do then is maybe just show them, if I could, I would show them in the code where it's happening and just walk through line by line, we're receiving an untrusted input, or we're doing a deserialization incorrectly here or something like that. Only once they fully understand what is an untrusted input, what is the serialization, what are these things that the security team is talking about with our highfalutin words, and then go through and fix it together. What I would also be looking for, though, is I'd be looking for trends, right? If we have this similar issue show up time and time and time again, what I would do is I would put not an entire halt on every single person's development process. That would be ridiculous. But I would bring it up as something that we absolutely need to be aware of and we need to be fixing in each of our PRs moving forward. And if we find the same issue in a PR, I would block the PR until we fix it. This is actually something that we're doing. We're going to start doing here at my day job. We have a couple things that show up time and time again, and we're just going to start blocking, like, you cannot merge this into our main code base until we fix this thing that we see over and over again.
Okay, you pass. And for our listeners, I have this was not done off. We did not. This was not sort of organized offline. I'm hitting the poor girl while we're on here live, well, not live, but recorded on a podcast.
What else is new?
So because I'm going to go further with it and go, okay, so you're blocking. You're doing all the right things. Everything you've said so far. You're blocking those PRs from getting merged.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if one of those developer team's bosses or their boss's boss comes and goes, Akira, why are you stopping us from going into production? How do you, as this gets hotter,
man, oh man, that's such a good question. I think we could even go back to an earlier topic of like showing a trophy, right? Or showing the results of if this vulnerability doesn't get taken care of, what the impact is. I would do this first before I blocked PRs. Like, I would try to communicate this first of like, here's what's going to happen if this threat is actually carried out. And then if I did have an engineering manager come to me and be like, why are we not in production right now? What I would personally do again is just underline like, here's why. And then of course, like, what I would also ideally like to do is set aside some time for us to just fix it with whoever is working on that project. Like, let's put 45 minutes in the calendar today to get this done so that we can get moving and get into production. I don't know how other people do it. That's how I would do it. I'm definitely curious how other people handle that.
At that point, it becomes very tricky, right? Because this is now that balance between must release code and keep customers happy and get more revenue versus I want to release secure code and not have the customers stop paying us because we're selling stuff with vulnerabilities in it. So it's a very toss-up. I don't think there's a right answer. I mean, I would go a step further back and say, as you begin that program or where you guys are now, try to make sure you have management buy-in. So as things get closer, that it's not a shock to them. But these are the type of questions our listeners are going through every day, which is why I wanted to sort of highlight it. And like I said, I'm not here to pick on that particular vendor. It's just I thought this would be an interesting sort of use case to go through with that.
For sure.
As a reward for your correct answers, let's hit one of your other stories. So you had something about SBOMs and something about CVSS, whatever that is. Either one you want to talk about?
Did you just literally say whatever that is?
Whatever that is.
Whatever that is. What a joke. Let's talk about the SBOM Everywhere working group. So I recently started working with a organization called the Open Source Security Foundation. They are a subset of the Linux Foundation. Yep. Yeah, they're super cool. Lots of really cool initiatives going on. And this is just one of the initiatives that I wanted to highlight, which essentially is a initiative of individuals that are trying to equip open source engineers and developers to use SBOM, software bill of materials, in their day-to-day operations. It's a very short article. It just gives a brief overview of like, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and if you want to get involved, there are many ways to do so. So in general though, just check out OpenSSF, the Open Source Security Foundation, subset of Linux Foundation. Their whole thing is securing the open source ecosystem, which is a huge job and takes a lot of hands and a lot of people, but really fascinating work that they're doing over there.
Most definitely. I'm a big fan of anything. Well, I think I can say anything. I think I'm a big fan of most things which Linux Foundation does, including OpenSSF. I'm super stoked to see you involved in that. It's a bunch of really great folks. And I think I've run into Josh before who wrote this, and he's a pretty great guy also. So greatness all around. Let's talk briefly about this CVSS thing, whatever that is. So it looks like version 4.0 is out. There's probably some changes from 3.0. I think we might have talked about this briefly, but why did it catch your attention?
Just essentially, so I've been doing AppSec now professionally for like 7-8 months, and one of the first things I learned was CVSS. Right, it was like, we have these things, it's called CVSS scores, and a really big deal. And it was kind of funny because like of how big of a deal people made them out to be. I don't really use them in my day-to-day work. Like they come into my work, but we're not like obsessed with vulnerabilities where I work, which I'm really happy about. We care about them, we remediate them, but we don't use CVSS for like our guiding star for every single thing that we do, which is actually really nice. However, I think it's really important, of course, to know what the current scoring system is and the changes. There is I linked the kind of teaser article in the show notes, and then I also linked the full presentation if you want to take a look. I think it's like, how many slides is it? 38 slides of like the announcement of the CVSS 4. And you can learn a lot more about like the different things that they're changing, why they're changing some things about CVSS 3. Yeah, so it's I'm not sure necessarily how much it'll affect my day-to-day job, but I think it's important to know that it is changing.
That's it's interesting to hear that it's not part of your job. And I think so CVSS is probably used more for vulnerability management than it is for pure AppSec, which is why you're not seeing it as often.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to think about just from my point of view, where it's like, I mean, yeah, it's a pretty small part of my life too. I happen to be a pretty big fan of it. But yeah, the PDF alone, the Prezzo will keep people busy. And as I've said before, I always say it, I think personally the best way to learn CVSS is go out and play with one of the calculators online. And as you manipulate the numbers across those different vectors, you can sort of get a sense for how those scores, what makes a CVSS 8.0 versus a 9.0. Let's see, as we start to run out of time here, we've lost our producer, so she's gone to a meeting, so I can keep going. I want to cover this one from Aqua, titled "The Anatomy of Silent Bob's Cloud Attack," and I made a Jay and Silent Bob comment, but yeah, so this is interesting from the point of view of this is happening pretty close to real time. So it's a 2-part blog. Since we're off for a week, we've now got part 1 and part 2. So these have been written in the last few weeks, and this is probably, I would call them an APT. I'm not sure if everyone would. There's a group out there called, I think it's Team TNT, yeah, that they are gathering a collection. They're building a botnet right now off of either a Docker systems Akira or Kubernetes. And they've got a few different ways they go into these systems. They've got some container images, which if they're able to access the standard thing is a Docker port is open on the internet, or the same thing with Kubernetes. If they're able to get in there and start running some of their containers that have known vulnerabilities in them, then they try to get breakouts down to the host. And so no one's quite sure, at least as the last time I looked over the weekend, what they're planning on doing with this botnet. But it's interesting to see over this 2-parter of like, breaking down what they're doing, getting into these systems, what happens when you get access to a Kubernetes system, and then sort of diving down in there and looking at their shell scripts. And they've done a pretty good job of figuring out what these guys are up to. So, we talk a lot about Kubernetes and hardening these things and sort of why you need to not have them open to the internet. And here's sort of a process which is happening literally today. So for folks who are running Kubernetes or Docker, you might want to go and give this a read and get an understanding of what's happening.
Can you explain, John, or I can explain, or we can explain together, what is a cloud worm?
That is a good question. And I'm curious to hear your definition. The way I would think of a cloud worm is, worms back in the day, like the Moore's worm and stuff like that, would hop from PC to PC. So you'd have to have some way to get that thing onto a system, either through USB or a floppy or a download. With these more cloud-based systems, and I'm now calling Kubernetes a cloud system, whether it's being hosted by yourself in your data center, you're hosting it publicly, or using like EKS or AKS or whoever's KS, some sort of a cloud-hosted Kubernetes system. The thing with those is they are large items of compute. Whereas, like, if you think about Amazon, I always use Amazon. Let's pick on, Oracle. If you think about you're using Oracle, they go to a pretty good amount of trouble to make sure that you're not exposing your admin credentials and your admin interface out to the public internet for anyone to be able to go and just access it. The problem with Kubernetes by default, whether it's on any of these cloud providers or, again, like I said, in your data center, is if you have the wrong ports open and you don't have that thing hardened, you've basically given someone permission to run something not just so much on your system, but on your cluster, right? So if you've got a cluster of 500 nodes, you're suddenly giving someone access to that. And then if you want to keep going down the cloud path, if you're able to actually get a breakout on that host, and in some cases you will get the credentials for, you will get a type of credential which allows you to access more of that cloud from that particular account owner. So it could become a very, very bad day. But it looks like these guys right now are just focusing on the botnet aspect. So if they can get a 500 node Kubernetes cluster and then point those 500 nodes at God knows what we'll see, that could be quite a DOS. So that's the way I think about it. I don't know. How about you?
Okay, so actually, I like to think of things sometimes in terms of what they are not. And when I was researching this, I was like, okay, what's the difference between a worm and, say, like a virus? And because a worm is not a virus is not a worm, but they kind of like, if you're sort of new to this, or maybe you've never encountered a worm before, they might seem like, well, aren't they kind of just like the same thing? From what I understand, a worm replicates itself from computer to computer to computer to computer without human interaction.
Yes.
Whereas a virus inserts its own code onto like a computer and affects the functioning of a computer. So it's not like traveling over the network from computer to computer. Now, I could be wrong, but that's my understanding of it.
No, I love
John,
it.
what are you? Is that legit?
Yeah, no, I love it. And it's funny how the spheres I play in, I don't deal with viruses as much, right? So that one just sort of went flying over my head when you asked me. Versus if you ask someone who is doing, I want to say PC support or desktop support or more focused on those endpoints, they probably are going to be thinking more of that. But it's I like the way you delineate those and compare them. It's I will tend to frequently hand wave and say malware, but these things are different, and that can help when you're trying to track down what it's doing on your system, or
Yes.
if you're trying to write them or understand how they're written. So that's a great point. I appreciate the clarification.
Cool. Right on.
Let's see. We're about to get kicked off. One last story, Akira. You pick.
Okay. Oh gosh. I haven't. Okay. Full disclosure. I didn't have a chance to read this one, but I really liked the title of it, and it was about that POC you just downloaded. Can you tell us about this?
Yes. This is a short one, so we can hit this one, and then people will stop yelling at us.
Cool.
So let's the quick backstory on this. Think about it. If we don't hear the phrase script kiddies as often as we used to, but one way or another, if you're in a position where you're trying to either attack a system, or you're doing a penetration test and you're trying to look for weaknesses, or maybe some of your developers are trying to figure out if their software is safe, and they've seen the SQL injection thing maybe as an example, and they want to see if that's a problem for them. The root thing going on here is, let's put it this way, Kara. If I give you a program and say, hey, go ahead and run this and test if your system is secure, like I wrote some code just specifically for you, and I'd like you to run it on your system, are you just going to run it?
No.
There you go.
Maybe.
That's the answer.
I don't think so.
What's right? That's it. We know each other. We're not like it's. We haven't known each other for decades, but at the same time, we have pretty good familiarity with each other. But still, it's
right.
I'm a security person. You're a security person. We're not just going to go and run that stuff automatically. But a lot of people will download a proof of concept, because what you'll find when you're looking for these things, to sort of give a little more story for folks. They mentioned here CVE 2023-35-829. I can't wait for those to have more digits. I don't know what that CVE is, don't care. But someone wanted to try to compromise the system with that CVE. They downloaded this, what's called a POC, proof of concept, which is basically the initial version of the attack code. It hasn't been made really weaponized or productionized yet. It shows that the vulnerability exists and it can be compromised. And they ran that. And in this particular case, it means that while that thing was running, it was going to take all the data off your system and upload it back up to someone else. So, cool. That's not good. So I don't know. It's if you've run into something like that, or if you would consider writing those, or where you want to go with that one.
I don't know where I want to go with that. I just thought the title was cool.
Yeah, the title is cool.
Yeah. Wow. Dang. Don't just run random stuff, folks.
Yeah. And actually, for folks who are interested, I have something on my GitHub. It's been there for many years now. So one of my personal pet peeves, similar to this, is you'll find those installation scripts where you curl something and then pipe it through sudo bash to get something to run and install your system. So I've got a project out there on my GitHub, which if you curl the URL and then sudo bash, it deletes curl, it deletes sudo, and it deletes wget, I think. So it sort of secures your system, make sure you don't do that again. But yeah, these are fun, and I hope people don't seriously run that, but it's out there. Akira, fun as always. Love having you around, so thank you for joining. And for our listeners, I'll real quickly, on Akira's website, she has a list of things. I've been looking at Akira. You have a list of projects which you think would be sort of cool to run with and play with and maybe work with someone else on. I've been thinking of putting together a list like this for all our listeners. Like, hey, sometimes something's interesting to me, but I don't want to run it myself. Track down Akira's website, take a look, see if something's in there you want to play with or would love to work with her on. Collaborate. I'll probably have a blog post out, something like this similar to. We're always looking for interactions with you guys. So we appreciate you smashing that like button, subscribing to the YouTubes or the podcast, wherever you listen to this. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back again next week with more news for Application Security Weekly.